going through the divorce process is a trip. And I do cover the divorce process in Volume 2. I actually have a divorce clause as part of the marriage contract.
A lot of people, they don't realize that just because you have more than one consort, when one leaves, it takes a part of you. It's devastating. Especially, it's not just devastating because you've lost someone you care about, but it's also devastating because now you have to deal with the carnage that's left a lot of times when that happens.
Children are involved.
Children is women, and women are sensitive. Women grow attached, and you have to deal with that, even if it wasn't anything you necessarily did wrong. But then you also have to be reflective and, you have to start thinking about the part that you played in it. For me and a lot of other people I've spoken to, there's no implication of ownership, because a woman is given a certain amount of freedom that she's usually not given in a monogamous situation. She doesn't have the same level of dependency on her as in a monogamous relationship. And she can kind of work through some things, and she may find out, okay, you know what? It's not that I no longer love you, but I no longer want to live in this country. When you go into a polygynous situation, realizing that I don't own anyone, which has to be number one, then that removes jealousy. So for like the people who always say, well, what about jealousy? Jealousy only comes in place when you feel ownership. So when you can remove that illusion of slavery or ownership, then if a woman decides, okay, it's time for me to push forward, we've been able to create some things together. And this goes back to what you said earlier when I immediately, and like you said, I try to incorporate women into my work immediately. So that way, if things don't work out, at least I know they're leaving with something and I'm left with something. I'm not having to rebuild my economy every time someone decides to leave. It's always something that I'm planning for in the event of. I think that's important. I want to get into that a little bit. Some of the precautionary steps that you take, or some of the polygynous prenuptials that you would advise to people?
Well, first of all, it helps if you're not getting married under the state system, okay? And a lot of polygynous families start off with the first wife and the man are married under the state, okay?
Right.
And there are issues of, for instance, just insurance, and I do cover that too in the book. I cover insurance policies and things like that. You get under a corporation name, like for instance, mine would be the House of Solomon, and you can get insurance for everyone. Now, if you get a divorce, you have to determine whether or not, A, that woman is the type who is going to want to take the children in the event of a divorce. I don't care what she's saying. We know, especially being men, we understand women. There's one thing if they say something, another thing if they're going to do something.
Right.
We have to plan for the contingency because remember, this is warfare. The subtitle to Volume 2 is Economic Warfare Strategy for Polygynous Families. And if she decides that she's going to renege and try to take your children, you have to literally plan for that in case she wants to do that. Would you be able to deal with a loss if she takes you through the court system? Okay? So a lot of this stuff is not foolproof. It's just not, because in this land especially, women, this is a gynocentric institution, the United States of America. It's a very gynocentric corporation. So you have to determine that, because that does happen.
Right.
You have to, some of the contingencies, you have to make sure that she is working, or if you have a concubine, or if you have a concubine where you are financing her, let's say that after 6 years, she decides to up and leave, she begins to sabotage the marriage, or for whatever reason, you have to remove her from the family. Well, I think it's a good idea to give her something like, let's say it might be $3,000 or $5,000 and have her leave. I have heard of this happening before. I believe it was a monogamous marriage. I heard of this happening in the Rasta community. In fact, there was a woman who was part of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes branch of Rasta. And she told me her family had to do that. They, one of her siblings or whatever was married, and she said, well, I want this much money so I can leave. But she left the children with the husband.
Right.
but she left and kept no contact. Now, I think that's telling because she was given something on her way out. But if our women are working and they're keeping most of their income, that means that they should have been saving some money anyway. So they shouldn't be taking anything, and you need to have that in the contract. That's a big, huge part of the book where I'm covering that. Because it's unfair for the woman to ask for more money from you when she should have been saving her own money. That's one reason why I don't believe that the women should give 100% of their income into the pot. I mean, if she's making like, $150,000 a year, I mean, there's no way in the world she should be leaving the marriage talking about some, she wants you to finance her way out. It's like, nah, babe, you should save, say at least 15% of your income. You can leave with your own money.
But one of the things to consider is if a woman turns around and says, but because I was here, we were able to drill this well. We were able to build another, structure on the land. We were able to build a fence, so forth and so on. I'm looking around at this homestead at my investment.
What you can do in that case, and I cover this in the book as well, if you're under a corporation name, because remember, if the law ever tries to come after you, this is a shield, okay? Everybody's under the House of Solomon, okay? This is one of the reasons why I use the term consort, okay, as opposed to wife, because a consort, you can't tell me that I'm engaging in polygyny and you're breaking the law, because I don't have wives, I have consorts, and there are business consortia, okay, which means every member of that consortium is a consort, even if it's a business entity. So when a woman comes in, if she is the chief financial officer, let's say it's the same one we just spoke of, she's making $150,000 a year. Well, when you're an employee of a company, you don't get to take what you put into the company. You don't get to take that, except any benefits that you may have had, like a severance package. You don't get to take, okay, just because you implemented an idea to make the workspace more efficient. So what? You don't get to leave with that.
Right.
When you leave the company on your own volition or you're fired, you leave, then that's it. So if you're running a corporation, then she has no legal recourse to try to attack you and get her money and try to say, oh, well, you're going to pay me $50,000 for me, when I leave. Nah, you don't get that because you were the chief financial officer. You were not a wife.
Right. Do we ensure that upon a woman's exit, though, as similar to the example that you gave with the Rasta family, do we ensure that she has enough to set herself up in a new life? Is that a concern?
Only if she was a concubine that you financed. If she's one of your consorts that you financed, most of the whole way, and she had no outside income, no home-based business, she didn't have a regular 9-to-5, then absolutely, you should give her something. That's fair. That's assuming that you have it. That's fair.
Right.
You don't want to be unjust because, when you commit injustice toward another, then, there's hell to pay. I mean, it's going to come back to you.